So welcome everybody again to SIETAR Europa's Anti-Racism Learning Series. This month our guest is Matthew Hill. Many of you know Matthew, but I am going to read his bio, which will probably cause for him a bit of discomfort. But again, this is all about stretching ourselves and learning to be uncomfortable. But Matthew helps corporate executives uncover their talent and bias and develop winning behaviors to realize their fullest potential. He's facilitated training sessions on inclusion, unconscious bias, culture, leadership, and communication for more than 28,000 corporate executives, delivering training, webinars, and keynote speeches in more than 30 countries. With a qualification in psychology, NLP, training quality, communication, workplace mediation, and intercultural training, he is also presented at 29 universities. Wow. He was president of SIETAR UK for 5.5 years, and he's written 6 books on leadership, negotiation, business, influential communication, and motivation. So we have in front of us today an incredible expert. Dana, a very impressive candidate for today's conversation, a journey deep into the heart of whiteness with Matthew Hill. So I think sometimes with these conversations, people say, how come she's talking to an old white guy? Right? But I wanted to talk to you as a representation of the older white guys, because you and I have had a couple of conversations about your journey into the heart of whiteness. You shared with me about a critical incident you had with our friend and colleague Kelly McLeod Shingen. Subsequently, you and I had a conversation at last year's Congress. So I'm wondering, Matthew, if we can begin with you telling us what started you down this path and why did you want to pursue more information on this?
Thank you, Tamara. After that big build-up, how can I fail to disappoint? But we'll manage your expectations. I'll tell you something. This is called self-deprecation, which is both British modesty and whatever else it is. I got called out this summer, so this is one of the reasons I put in more hours, quite a few hours. Elmer Dixon. We know Elmer Dixon.
We know Elmer.
Extraordinary character, and there's a extraordinary character. And he called me out. So we're starting with a big shout out, call out, shout out. It was a week after Amy Cooper and George Floyd, 25th of May, and I had some other stuff going on, and it was the background, and I hadn't reacted, and I hadn't seen anything, and blah, blah, blah. And I got a fairly tough message. I think it's a mistake, Matthew, that you've never issued a statement. I felt horrible and just went through what have I done? Where are we now? Totally lost in a spin of things. And what did I do? This is a confession. I felt this, and I felt like, I'm going to have to justify myself to Elmer. I'm going to have to write something and say, no, you got it all wrong, mate. I'm all right. You can recognize the behaviors going on here. And I thought, well, how can we actually make something of this disaster of my positioning? I think just one thing, he did think I was a SIETAR committee member, which I no longer was, but I got it. I had a newsletter going out every month and bloody blah. And from his perspective, it looked like I was silent. To be honest, I thought about a statement later, and it wasn't me. I thought, what am I going to add to the chat? It wasn't me. So I never owned it. I didn't do it. I was never going to do it, even if I hadn't had the call out. But I thought, how can we make the best of it? So I just started. I think I know a little about a lot and a lot about a little, but do I know enough? Do I know enough about this? And the obvious question just slapped me in the face. No, I don't know enough about this. It's an American context. It was a thing. There was history. There was now. There was politics. There was all sorts of stuff. But we, Jim Crow. lot of people in Europe, a lot of people in the UK will have heard it, but won't particularly know it, or peonage, or whatever else it is, the Tulsa Massacre. And so I thought, well, I tell you what we might do. And then it came from then. And it seemed like a good idea to do two things: to inform myself, but also compress the knowledge. And we'll come back to this later. So I went on a journey. A lot of my physical commitments to planes, trains, automobiles, and classrooms had been postponed. I was out of the top tax bracket, so I had more than enough time to really devote myself in fairly an intensive way to get this this latest piece going. Which is
Right,
what
your
we did.
glossary of terms you're
So
referring to.
that was my story. Yeah, well, we'll probably come back to that later.
Yeah.
So I've done quite a lot of things, and I tell you what, also just as another context idea, I started the channel to be a light entertainment channel this summer, and then after the 25th of May, it very much changed its tune to Matthew having to be the adult occasionally in the room, as opposed to just the entertainer. So my journey started before that, but that really is the story of summer.
So, so thank you for sharing that. I think that, the work that you've done in the last month has been quite visible with the glossary you've shared, your captive audience YouTube channel, your interview with Brett Perry and Christian Erfla about this. And I have shared with you that I think I shared with you over a year ago when we were in Leuven, and I shared with you since that I think it's particularly important for our white colleagues, allies, and advocates to be visible in this conversation about race and anti-racism, because the burden for a very long time has been placed on practitioners of color. And the burden is particularly heavy on practitioners of color at this point in time. I am exponentially busy since May. I am having to turn away work because of the amount of requests that are coming in and the opportunities to train and have conversations and help people in their growth and journey. But I'm wondering if we might go back further in time and tell me about the critical incident in your learning with Kelly and how that has helped you and sort of driven your journey and having doing the work around understanding race, racism, and whiteness.
No, exactly. And if I might just go back to almost the beginning, going in the wrong direction, then we'll come on to Kelly. If I stray, Tamara, I know that you will bring me back. My journey was not one of being next door to something different. I was born in one of the whitest towns in the UK, so a small town, 35,000 people, Canterbury. We had the head of the Church of England, no comment, and it was a university town, and it was basically sort of white surround. And it sounds like I'm virtue signaling on performing. The headmaster said, we've got a Nigerian boy turning up next term. He's coming, be nice to him, which was great. And then the classroom teacher said, his winter's coming. He will never have seen snow. Sounds trivial. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And I remember mocking him. Ha! You've never seen snow. I thought that was my first othering statement. I can look back now with a sense of, what are we doing? So that sort of socialization. Or there was another guy, we'll call him Robert H. He knows who he is, who was this guy who was part of our gang. And he was a roller hockey, whatever that is, a roller hockey exponent on Herne Bay Pier. And I do remember his journey from being solidly a part of the group to pushing back and exploring all sorts of things. He was a black boy, and I look back now, and it was the Natasha Kelly, the journey of otherness that he was going through, and of course I hadn't a clue what was going on there. When I was 18, we had the Brixton Riots. So the people from the UK will understand what that was. That was a very big deal, and I was 18. So if you think about this summer, this was a right-wing government economic success, recession, some heavy-handed policemen. If you saw a van turn up, it's called the SPG, the Special Patrol Group. They all dressed up to the nines and wanted a bit of argy-bargy, and they were basically over-policing black areas. So Brixton was a black area. There's a whole story behind that, quite an interesting one, which connects with Windrush and Caribbean advertising for Caribbean workers to come to the UK after the war. And so this thing absolutely kicked off. There was a house fire in New Cross where 5 young black youths died, and it was seen to be arson, and the police didn't do enough, or the perception was they didn't do enough to sort that one out and find the perpetrators and prosecute them. And therefore there was a lot of tension in the air. And then this stop and search was going pretty crazy, and it all kicked off. 300 vehicles were destroyed, 30 buildings were destroyed. Everyone was pretty anti the bullying tactics of the police, certainly people sort of centre and left of centre, people my age. And that was a real awakening. That was a real awakening. It was a powerful time. A year later, I was in London and befriended someone, Petra. She lived in Tulsa Hill just next door, and I found myself surrounded by African artists from Ghana and Nigeria. And so that was a weird thing, and we all had that as a sort of shared context. So it was unemployment, the racist police. So these were real motifs running through everything. So that was fascinating, but it went away in a different idea. So we had this powerful concept, and then I've had other things as well. So I've been to the Czech Republic, and so where if you think Canterbury's white, try the Czech Republic. Jana, you're from the Czech Republic. You'll someone on the call was there, I noticed, from Prague, where there were Africans there. And do you know why? So Soviet, communism, camaraderie. So these guys had come from communist countries in Africa as an exchange and stayed. So they were very specific. They had a very specific context to them. But it was there. And there I noticed less the sort of, because it's White Town, was my ridiculous privilege. I was earning about 20 times as much, literally, as the people around me. I was doing maybe 110% of the work because I was the manager. They were doing 80% of the work for 5% of the money. Yeah, you're thinking I'm a bad guy, and how can you rationalize that? How can you make that not incongruent? So that was quite a weird thing. And you do normalize everything.
Right.
And so there was a lot of learning going on. So that's sort of part of my experience, and I've got plenty of other work and so forth. No, with the Kelly idea, that was there's a number of different stories, but we later did. Well, there was her performative piece in Lille where she did the dramatic piece about hair, skin tone. And Susanna and myself, we saw that. And Susanna said to me, I thought about that every day for a year. Wow. So it was profound and it was moving.
So we're
then we went
to
on to Natasha, who's there
that Kelly MacLeod Shingen does, called Anything But Black, right?
That was powerful. And then Elmer Dixon was there talking about the Black Panther experience. And by the way, shout out to Grant Douglas, who invited everybody there. So that was his initiative to try and bring culture and diversity together. I don't know, there weren't many other operatives who were connected and inviting. So that was quite an important part of the sort of SIETAR archive. And then we had that. So that was extraordinary. Then we had this, a couple of years later, we had a workshop with Natasha and Kelly, and it was the flower of, are you, within these categories and subcategories, are you in the dominant part or are you in the oppressed part? And there was nowhere to hide there. And it was, I'm majority dominant. And that was very powerful. Well, that's a smack in the face. You feel all sorts of things, guilt and shame and all sorts of stuff, but you also got to own it in that text. There's nowhere to hide, which is the fantastic thing about those particular workshops. And then, you do go from that. And it's been about from there, it's been about an exploration. We'll come back to this point, but really adding the richness of the diversity exercises on top of culture. I don't think anything from the diversity canon of work actually detracts from intercultural pieces. So that's quite an important part, which I think we'll circle round to later. So that was profound.
Yeah, it's the intersectionality, right? Which is why, you know, what we've started having that conversation in SIETAR USA, you know, 15, 20 years ago, and you know, and continues to be the ongoing work of where these intersect, and I think today they're becoming more aligned. Um, so we did here in SIETAR Ireland a webinar this summer on the intersectionality between diversity and inclusion work and intercultural work. And so I'm wondering if you could share with people what are the learning opportunities you've taken advantage of along the way that have helped you go from your personal experience and your sort of personal awareness to being a intercultural practitioner who also now is teaching around doing teachings and trainings around inclusion and unconscious bias and focusing on that intersectionality. What was the sort of learning process for you?
No, sure. So, and it comes from a fairly basic idea, almost escaping the gravity of essentialism. Again, we'll probably come back to that later. So that the typical intercultural idea is job focus. So you learn on the job. So I'd been in the Czech Republic. I'd had a regional role around Slavic, Central Europe, bit of Eastern Europe, and also Turkey, just for good measure. And you were learning those ideas. So with the help of SIETAR congresses, workshops, courses, and the rest of it, you become an interculturalist. But really what that is the majority European descendant, slightly imperialist version. It's the majority account of these things for US, European, UK corporates as they post a fairly privileged individual as an expat with a spouse and a couple of kids in a capital city. So it's not to do it down. It's a rich and exciting idea which came out of the idea of this, you know, the unit is the country. The unit is the country. The country is king. So if we look at Hofstede and the rest of it, again, we might circle back to this. You have the law, you have language, you have a border that makes a country. Therefore, that's it. And looking back, even now, I want to give you, the viewer, some sort of experience of that. A lot of you are going, "Yeah, what's wrong with that? That's my day job. That's my day job." It's missing quite a lot. We might circle back. We'll leave it for now. It was missing quite a lot. So, unconscious bias, there's two aspects of that. One is the socialization. So that would be people like Milton Bennett, his DMIS, developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, acculturation, socialization, and also things like media representation and so forth, which really just takes you into a different place. And then you have brain science, the wonderful Mai talking about all these ideas and really sort of poo-pooing a lot of the essentialist ideas and moving on to something else. And you have to throw it away. You have to throw away the basic model of country stereotypes, which is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. So the sophisticated stereotypes, we're all sort of building these things, and I found the sort of freedom, the release to go into something else. And so the units that we might talk about are the individual story and journey, critical incidents, cases, but also I quite like the idea, Christian talked about it on his thing, of the co-constructed subculture of any team or group, which hasn't got a flag on it. And there's some funny ideas about just how we mingle. So I'm speaking native British English. We're having a go tonight. A lot of people listening to this will be speaking international business English. It's a bit of a joke, but it's quite a profound one. I will say to them in a room. Do you remember rooms, training rooms last year? Who speaks the better English?
Right.
And it will be them, and they might dispute it, but I go, it's you. So you've got this tight, stress-tested lexicon and so forth. So we transition to otherness. So unconscious bias through socialization, unconscious bias through brain structures, and Jane Goodall and the rest of it.
Yeah.
Primates are fairly unpleasant people, or fairly unpleasant creatures. So let's just take a broader thing. But I must say, it's almost the emotional part of that. You go from I am me in my country passport flag to, hang on, a lot of this is irrelevant. A lot of this is a missteer, a misstep. That's quite interesting. And then you're free to go to other places. So just that concept of, right now, we've got, whatever it is, 95 people on a webinar. This is a subculture. We are creating what you, young Tamara, let me get away with, what you don't let me get away with. Those are the rules. I'm going to comply with those rules because I feel like it. And we had some rules to begin with here, didn't we? Do this and be respectful to the peers. So we are sublimating our needs, wants, and desires as individuals to volunteer. Hopefully, everyone's a volunteer tonight. To be part of this group, and therefore we run away with this idea, and then you add some other stuff as well. This is a provocative. It's respectful, but it's also a provocative, dangerous space where we're going to operate at the very edges of white comfort.
Right.
And I think we've got permission to do that. We've got a contract to do that. So wow. So you're just freed. You're just free to get to this other place, and maybe to have a deeper, better, more advanced, less simplistic conversation.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of it, right? That the intercultural field, which I think for me as somebody who's been involved in USA and Europe, that there are assumptions we make as interculturalists about our mindsets and our ability to be aware and conscious of what's happening around culture and difference. But we also, have to recognize that there are some blind spots. So I think the idea of you suggesting that part of the learning is letting go of what we have learned and what we, interculturalists make their money on is as equally daunting to people as the idea of challenging their own whiteness, right? That
Absolutely.
those are things you're saying people should do. And I think that those are scary prospects for people. Right. So we have a question.
Love it. Yeah. So, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say to fall off a cliff. So I don't know, 30 people maybe on the call are relocation advisors, country experts. They will be associates, and they will have principals who provide. In the old days, it was this folder, use the folder. And, now you're thinking, we could throw most of that stuff away and really start again with a much more sophisticated adult to adult conversation, and have a much nicer day and a better lunch, and really do something there. So I say, yeah, I know if you're under restrictions, you've got to use the material. You're going to feel a stress and an incongruence with that. With whiteness, I mean, I've had some crazy days. In the old days, I went up to Edinburgh, and there was an Indian woman, ethnically Indian, who was integrated very much so. And we started talking about some of this stuff, and she was so awkward. And I just immediately, super empathically, massively resonated with her discomfort and just sort of collapsed in the early days. I am a facilitator. I own that pitiful performance, and it makes you strong. And then you go, well, okay, did I approach that in the right way? Let's have another go. And then you eventually get there. And so there's this massive avoidance. Natasha does it. I think on the last thing, who identifies as white. I remember we had a gig in SIETAR Malaga, SIETAR España Malaga, and everyone started with that. What do you identify as? And all the white people in the room just, oh God, pity those floors are so solid. Pity they couldn't just open up and let us drop down.
Yeah, yeah. The same thing happened in
I'm white.
the exact same
It's a
thing.
fake. Yeah, yeah. It's a fake construct. It's historical. Let's just call it European descendants. We've all got African mothers as well, if that makes us feel better. Once you get over it, and this is the whole point about the terms and the references and having the conversation, the excruciating shame and guilt and embarrassment and anger and denial and defense sort of calms itself, and you can do something. You can do something. So there's this rarefied space where you can actually achieve something.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't want to miss this. Ursula asked, how do we learn to address these sensitive topics in an appropriate and professional way? And how do we determine we're doing the right thing if our own experience being white is not constantly educating our sensitivities?
That's a very long question. So let's look at it. So how can we be professional? No, exactly. Yes, Ursula, you've massively reacted to my have a go and learn as you go, my pragmatic British approach. There is a ton of material. I would say I am still a student of it. So, and this will relieve about 1/10 of the population here. So I won't be telling you how to do it. I will not be doing that. I am a student, so I'd be in the same classroom as you. Have we all just, he's not going to the head of the class. He's not appropriating. He's not colonizing the classroom. And I think that's the way. How do I educate myself? I have watched more videos than my son, and he likes Netflix and Amazon Prime. I have read some books, read some brilliant long reads. 5,000 words is now not a long read, and you fill in the jigsaw puzzle, and then you try. And I do it. I have my family as my team. Do you get it? Do you want it? And here we go. So like my youngest, his better half has just finished a dissertation, quite a serious dissertation on intersectionality as it affected particularly women from the last recession. So I've got a perfect sounding board who's someone, Generation Z, who can really ping off me. So the idea is to experience it, discuss it, and see where you are. Also politically, what is fairly disgusting in America, it is unbelievably polarized.
Yeah.
And so that also gives a very useful learning opportunity when you look at left-based or progressive sources and you look at right-based sources. There was a two truths, but there's something quite interesting in between. So Thomas Sowell or Coleman Hughes or Glenn Lowry. Look up Glenn Lowry. He is the father I never had. And actually, he's quite interesting because he's vacillated between progressive and right again. And that is, to me, it's a sort of French synthesis. It's Cartesian. That, to me, is one of the easiest ways of just, you're seeing two sides of the argument, therefore you can work it out for yourself. I mean, he gives you a few hints along the way. So that's the idea. Sensitivity is about permission. My problem with the whole thing is the crassness, if you like, of the black-white interface at the moment. Not within SIETAR, but on the street. The black-white interface is such a crass, sort of awkward first date level. I think if I've got a job here, is just to get up the level of the exchange to something more constructive.
Yeah, I think you've said some important things. I think one is this isn't about a destination; it's a journey, right? And that there's a lot of learning that you have done and will continue to do, and everybody does. And I think Natasha iterated the point is we're not asking people to be perfect, we're asking people to do the work. And that was something that you said earlier, and why, you know, I loved the conversation you had with Brett and Christian, because it was three guys who were doing the work and having the uncomfortable conversations and making mistakes. And those of us who seek your allyship and advocacy and support appreciate you doing the work, so I don't have to do the work for you, so others don't have to do the work for you. I think that is so critical. And I think also to the point that you made about, you know, the discourse is that, you know, there is no such thing as a Black monolith. We don't all agree. We don't all have the same perspective. You know, you mentioned Glenn Lowry to me earlier. I did a little research. There's a lot of his perspective I disagree with, but there's a lot of his points about agency that really motivate his perspectives that I can understand, but I don't see it all the way through it, and he does. But I think that's the point, that there's a lot of reading to be done. There's a lot of workshops. You know, the White Privilege Conference was on last week. I mean, one of the most amazing things about this year is that conferences that we would not have been able to attend because it would have been, you know, financially prohibitive because of travel, we can now be a part of, right? We could now attend conferences that otherwise we might not have been able to. And so I think that there's a lot of learning opportunities. It is about the openness and the willingness and being, I mean, if we as intercultural trainers have not told our trainees 1,000 times to be willing to make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's how you're going to learn. Like we have all said that and taught that to people. So I think that that is really important. So tell me, what do you think the commonalities and vital differences are between diversity, equity, and inclusion work and the role of a regular interculturalist?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. If you think about cultural relativity, that would break the monolith it would break the stereotype. It would break the monolith. So that's a powerful idea. Co-constructed group culture, we hinted at that earlier, is a very different frame. So sort of who's in the room, as opposed to other ideas. That is, I think, the new direction, newish direction where intercultural is going. That is where diversity needs to go. I mean, we do have to remember that there's still quite a lot of monolith stuff. There's quite a lot of essentialism happening on the progressive side. That's, you know, where it's rather like essentialism and dimensions just never seem to go away from culture. Oh, we still need it. Oh, we still need it. Oh, we still need it. You don't, but you think you do. So there's a lot of work there. To me, it's like adding. So there's nothing wrong with country history. I loved working in the various countries and learning the history and putting them together bit by bit. So a Turkish victory was a Hungarian defeat. And you went to two museums and you learnt it, the same incident, the same battle, whatever it was, 1526, the Battle of Mohacs. There were winners and there were losers. You learnt it from that. But it's the relocation associate. It's not just moving from the majority story, it's adding another layer, which is the colonial, the imperial, the otherness. This is where it goes wrong. The diversity is not in the next country. The diversity is right next to you in the capital city. And so, but it's not too far. You've done all the hard work. You know, if you're an interculturalist, if you've got a master's in that or whatever, you've done all the hard work. It's sort of updating the models, but also freeing yourselves. And I must say, having a much more adult conversation with the people who you are purporting to help. So I think there's lots to do there. I don't think there's anything, this is a big stretch here, I don't think there's anything I've learned from diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, which is not of value to an interculturalist. So it's almost the other way. So I'll say something. Interculturalists, this to me is sort of stage two. The platform is interculture. The development of that is the DEI work. That's what I find so exciting. Again, with D'Angelo, we'll go on to that again. D'Angelo, I thought she spoke, she put words to what we felt. Diversity puts words to what we feel. It explains so much. It's the sort of the Isaac Newton before and after. And that's exciting.
Yeah, I think it is. It's one of the things that, being Black did not make me an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It certainly made me an expert in what the Black experience is like. But I had to study and learn stuff around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But my original study was in linguistics, culture, and intercultural understanding. That was my academic background, right? And so when I began to do more study around DE&I, it became such a fit for me, because these concepts that I had learned around culture and intercultural communication became these really great mechanisms and tools and frameworks by which we could now start to explore things that were more complex for all intents and purposes, right? And that, as you said, that you can certainly, in a relocation or training of executives, explain, what's going to happen in a meeting with other executives in the UK or Japan. But if somebody is really going to be living in another culture, migrating, immigrating, really interacting, you're going to have to explain a lot more about the social strata and dynamics and history that's happening in that country. I live in Ireland, and when I do relocation trainings, you have to talk about the historical dynamics of this island and its relevance in interactions with people today, the same way that I do when I talk to people who are relocating to the United States. It would be a disservice to suggest to people, oh, come to Ireland, it's great, people are friendly, you'll love the pub, and then have them say, oh, Ireland's great, being in the UK is so much fun, and then having them lose all credibility with everybody around them, right? But if people don't do the work around understanding the complexity of culture, and that's why when somebody mentioned earlier sensitivities, for me, right, and the definition of what intercultural sensitivity is, and having the ability to be interculturally sensitive, isn't about being easy to offend. It's about having the ability to recognize complexities, right? It's about recognizing things for how complex they are, not being somebody who's easily offended. We have to be able to see things more complexly than we have.
I love it. Yeah, there's a number of different ideas there, and this is what we talk about. The two safe spaces. So I think today we've got the brave space, safe space. Thanks, Ola, for putting me straight on that. Which is we have permission to go to the edges, maybe beyond the edges, the envelope of comfort in the pursuit of a truth or meaning or purpose or progress, as opposed to the other which is being readily triggered to be offended, which I must say, and then we get onto white fragility as well. It's a fairly pointless activity. And it's massive denial. And then we get onto some other schools like peacemaking. What stops nations who've been at war making peace? It is the same mechanism. It's the avoidance of rewriting their own history or feeling different about their own history. We do need to move on in a courageous way.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell everybody, what approach to inclusion training are you applying in your practice? What methods are you leaving to others to do?
Yeah. Lovely, lovely. We might pop up a slide because we are so confident of the technology tonight. It hasn't let us down at all. There's nothing too profound here, but I wanted to show that I could put together a pretty slide. So if we do the second one, Actually, probably control it from your side. If we do the second one down and with that. So what would I do? What would I not do? The basics of neuroscience. I have got a physiology degree, but it was before I tell you, I did psychology and physiology, and I found it so frustrating because really, listen to this. This is how old I am, and white and a man. It was before brain was linked to behavior. It was before brain was linked to behavior because we just didn't have the technology to measure the brain. So neuroscience, the amygdala hijack, the comfort with familiarity, the stress and defense and drama about difference. So which adds up to unconscious bias. Happy to run through that, not in too much detail. Socialization, acculturation from any and every source I love, history, and the concept of programming. So, and that would cross over between culture and diversity. Where did you pick up your first value? What was her name? Mama, and all that sort of stuff. And here we go. And then the next level of structural corporate change. So that is not, systemic racism, getting rid of the society. That is making the recruitment process blind and some other ideas. To me, that is a lot of logic. It's a great fun, almost sort of puzzle solving idea. So nudge, facts, and ideas. And that's a sort of mental challenge of solving ideas. Skipping over the next one, we'll come back. Also mediation. So I happen to have done a few dozen conciliations and mediations. And I find that methodology is fantastic. And another thing that I've found is a mediation is a sort of escalated complaint or conflict which you need to resolve. I find people who are, listen to this, underrepresented, they tend to be more represented in a mediation. So people who are not accepted or listened to or validated cannot have agency, or they're not getting the results that they want. Therefore, more of those cases are coming up to mediation. I find that fascinating. That is an observation. I think research probably backs that up. And so what's that about? That is about I'm okay, you're okay, dialing down some of the emotions, validating, listening, empathizing, but really extracting the core of the case, the difference, the conflict, putting it on a timeline and doing something constructive with it. So that is so exciting and it has so much potential. It's quick, it's ethical, it's open to everyone's participation. So going back, I have worked in places like Baltimore and Riyadh, bizarre though that absolutely was and is. I wouldn't say it's my journey to take someone radically different from me through the whole journey of oppression and so forth. I don't think that's my remit. Peacemaking, I think, is absolutely fascinating. Within some of my associations, we're learning more about that. I think that is, where the conversation could go next. We talked about reparation. We talk about, to me, I've often described transatlantic slavery as the first war, so as in war. The second 10 oppressions of peonage and the rest of it is a second war. And really the political crazy at the moment, you could almost see as the third war. So why not? I wouldn't do it myself, but why not apply the principles of peacemaking? If you look at, peace in Rwanda or the Middle East and so forth, there's some technologies there. So I wouldn't do that, but I think they are valid. So, and Tamara, tell me, what have I missed? There are some other schools that probably you are aware of that I'm less aware of or unaware of.
No, I think that that is just earlier today, I was speaking with a colleague and she said, well, I don't know if I could be having conversations in the diversity and inclusion space. And I was like, well, but you're a trained coach and facilitator, you're an empath, and you have facilitated courageous and critical conversations for most of your career. So you know how to help people have conversations about difficult topics, right? And I said to her, very much what you're sharing here is you have a certain set of expertise that can facilitate conversations around difference and diversity and inclusion that don't necessarily focus on critical race theory, but there are dynamics that play into the complexity of these topics, right? And not everybody who understands critical race theory understands structural corporate change, right? That in itself is its own beast. So part of it is how we rely on what we already know and what we're already experts on, and applying it to these important topics.
Exactly. No, exactly. But I think there is, within the community, I've had some pushback. I'll say something very cynical, but we all know it's true. There is enough white racism to go round. My place, my space is not your space, and that's okay. They can overlap. You could borrow me for a day. I could borrow you for a day. I see myself as being able to get some fairly rapid engagement with middle UK, US, European, continental European corporates, and we can fly pretty quickly. And I can say some things which will be received by people who are relatively fragile. So there is a specific place, but it's not a land grab to take everything. It's being effective in a particular space. I think there's a ton of people who need to be brought up to code, to specification on this, just not to have the most crass or utterly inappropriate conversations. So to me, it's take some of these concepts and these words, these concepts, and discuss them. What do you think about that? To me, a multi-generational dinner table is the most perfect place to have all of this. So if you look at culture used to just be incredibly elitist, and now it's taught everywhere. And so why shouldn't this be as well? I think we have to universalize it.
Yeah.
I remember one of the other ones, Patricia said, be careful what we do with this knowledge. I said, well, yes and no. There's some very nasty people who are finding this knowledge out for themselves and misusing it. What I'm doing is keeping honest people honest.
Right. Yeah. Do we have another slide, or we?
No. I thought I'd show you that I can use PowerPoint. I'm exhausted now. We can go back to conversation.
Great. So to that point, because I think that we know historically, as long as diversity and inclusion training have kind of been a thing, particularly in the corporate sector, that there's diversity and inclusion training that has been successful and some that has been bad and backfired. And we generally operate on the principle that no diversity and inclusion training is better than bad diversity and inclusion training, right? And I think that is something that we have to be mindful of, and I think that we also, as trainers and facilitators, always have to sort of operate from a fundamental sort of code of ethics and morality about our role and responsibility. But that also doesn't mean that we don't develop new knowledge and expertise and experiences that we can then use to facilitate conversations. And I think not everybody is ready to have a conversation with me or someone like me about this stuff, and that they might be more ready and more open and more able to learn from someone like you. And to me, having that spectrum and that diversity and learning experiences is what is needed to try to change this conversation from being so polarized, right? Like there's a lot in the middle. So that being said, you have written and broadcast an abundance of content this summer with 60 plus film interviews for your pop-up YouTube channel, Dear Captive Audience, and 2 long reads covering a compressed history of slavery from 1619 to its official end. and the 10 Oppressions After Slavery, as well as another long read, a 50-term glossary around race, whiteness, and the problems and missteps with the debate around race. So, and in your discussion with the 2 chats, you talked about doing the work and making mistakes. We've had a lot of conversation about your role in the field, et cetera, et cetera. So, what are we all supposed to do with all of this? With what hope do we expect to people to gain from all of this content?
Oh, your money back. Good. So it came from my perspective. I think what I do, I put out a lot of content. I did 12 years of a newsletter. I write a lot. I make a lot of films. I worked it out. I've got 5 YouTube channels. Go and find them, people. I'll give you 100 quid if you can find them all. What am I trying to do there? I'm trying to get various sources and putting them in a digestible form to get people started. And so the compression is 5,000 words on the history of the American, the transatlantic trafficking, and the post-official slavery, the oppression, Jim Crow and redlining and peonage and the rest of it, which again, a lot of European, a lot of UK people, they know some of it, they don't know all of it. It's car crash reading, it's fairly disgusting, but it's a very good primer for going on for there. The idea of the glossary is about racism. It talks about racial essentialism, which again was a sort of Glenn Lowry idea, and it absolutely triggered with what Milton Bennett was saying. I thought, oh my God, this is a eureka moment. So we've looked about that, and of course Robin DiAngelo and her white fragility. Again, you've got these weird feelings, this incongruence. This woman comes along, talks about it, and you go, my word, you've named it. You've done some stuff. There's controversy around her. But I think that's fascinating. So to me, there's a curriculum. The curriculum might be about the intercultural piece. It might be about conflict models. I particularly like the Austrian Glasel. He does everything from a friendly dispute to declarations of countries at war. It's mediation, it's peacekeeping, and so forth. And obviously, the various schools within diversity as well. So my job is, if you want to learn, I will give you a compression that will set you on hopefully a decent path. And by the way, if I've made it, there's a few deliberate mistakes in there. If you find a mistake, then just tell me. We're open to that. So to me, it's an accelerator, because a lot of people are utterly overwhelmed. Read a book, read 10 books. Here's 10 books. Most people don't read any books in the world. 50% of books that are started are never finished. So we're in the YouTube attention deficit space. So my idea is to compress those, give you the momentum to carry on and start your own research, your own ideas. And then the other idea we come back to, I would say, it's particularly in terms of American YouTube stuff, make sure you're getting a good, healthy diet of progressive and modest right, not crazy right, modest right, and then you'll maintain your balance and your equilibrium. So yeah, you are free to. It's a free resource. Just feel free to fill your boots with that, and do comment. Do tell me. I'm sure you will where I'm going wrong. Happy to be put right, and to share some stuff with me.
Yeah. I think it's important, right? If anything, I think having the conversations is important. I think doing the research is important. I think challenging and questioning what we read and find in those conversations and research is important. But I think the most important thing is doing the work. I know that we're at the top of the hour, so lots of folks are signing off to attend other sessions. So thanks to those of you who have attended. For those of you who can stay on, and want to ask questions, please post your questions in the Q&A, and we will take your questions in the Q&A, either for myself or for Matthew, to keep the conversation going. But yes, thanks to those of you who attended and have to go. So to that point, we have a question that came in. October is Black History Month in the UK. Any tips on how companies can acknowledge this without burdening their Black employees?
No, exactly. Very good. Very good. Someone very close to me had that conversation yesterday. What you were saying, Tamara, your ethnicity does not make you an expert. And also what's the worst thing you could do? Hello, you're Black, we'll put you on a committee. No, no, no. So the idea of shared resources and all this, I tell you what, there was a facilitated meeting I heard the other day, which started with the white directors just acknowledging fairly lightly, but very profoundly, their privilege. I went to a good university. That has helped me inordinately in my career. I feel that when I've applied, I've been taken seriously, blah, blah, blah. They've owned their unearned, inherited advantage. They've articulated it in a fairly normal, modest way. And it's been, and then another guy said, well, I certainly wouldn't be a director here with a different background or something else, because I know that this was a particularly legal idea. I wouldn't have got my first step on the ladder. So that's powerful. So that idea of leadership coming from the directorship, of acknowledging, if you like, unearned advantage, is powerful. And if they're freaking out, maybe just get someone to help them with that. And then we're getting on to some, if other people want to share some other ring stories, that is quite a useful way of doing it. Again, what's the problem with Black History Month? And it's very interesting, and a lot of people are saying this. It's all about the transatlantic trafficking of slaves from Africa. It's about Martin Luther King, and it's about Black Egypt being brilliant. So none of which should not be taught. But there is a lot more to it. There is a lot more to it. So I think, Black History Month should be an expanded curriculum, and people should access. I mean, everyone should. What I used to do when I ran a team was get these people to access something and present it on a Friday afternoon, lubricated by a bit of medium-priced wine. There are ways to do these things which are less excruciating.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I think we have to, white men have to go through the excruciating, like, going to a nudist colony. Not that I've ever been. The first hour is excruciating. I think you do have to go through that to get to the other side, the liberation of going, we can have a conversation and no one's going to implode or explode. It's a pretty decent space to be in.
Yeah, I think things like Black History Month, and in the D&I world we talk about, I think it's, some people say the 5 F's, some people say the 3 F's, but it's like food, fun, and fairs, right? That organizations and communities get really caught in having events where there's food and some fun and some, fanfare, whatever, very superficial sort of, if we talk about visible iceberg culture stuff. And I think what can happen in Black History Month, or, whether it's Hispanic Culture Month or Women's Awareness or whatever the month is, the idea, I think, is an opportunity of where are learning opportunities, where are growth opportunities, right? How do we use this time as an organization to stretch and explore what it's like to be Black in our organization, and where there are gaps for Black folks in our organization. And if there aren't Black folks in our leadership, why is that? Let's take a look at our recruitment process, our interviewing process, our culture. Do a climate assessment in your organization and find out what the climate in your organization is. Create learning opportunities, And bring in experts, facilitate conversations. I think there's a lot of things that can be done as long as it's done from a place of curiosity, openness, and willing to learn. We have some great questions coming in here. Susan Holmes, who was our facilitator last month, said,
yes.
Could you give us an example of the moderate right in the US, and why is it the moderate right?
I would love to. And before I do that, I will give you my emotional journey. So I won't tell you how far left I was if you're from America, because you'll freak out. You'll turn off immediately. And so when I first heard these characters, I'm going to give you their names in a moment. When I first heard these characters, I was disgust. But when you look at really where they're coming from, so forget the color of their political flag and just listen to what they're saying. They're often coming from a statistical, fairly cold, unempathic, factual level. Those facts are not untrue. You won't want to hear them. You won't enjoy digesting them. And then if you look at the third level, which I've found with people like Coleman Hughes, who's one of the people, is the guy is a warm and fantastic human being, despite his slightly right-wing politics. Am I giving myself away? That neutrality of a mediator is really coming out today. The guy in the little sentences, he makes these so profound comments about the exclusion of black people. He's a young black man, very bright, young black man, young, gifted, and black. And he will just give you these little snippets, which are almost this sort of emotional truth of him. So you have Coleman Hughes, who is extraordinary. You have Glenn Lowry. Should I type some of these in? Attendees, here we go. So we go. Glenn Lowry is the father I never had. So he's vacillated from being affirmative action, take down the structure, to being fairly right at the moment. But when you watch his podcast, Two Black Men with John McWhorter, excuse the capital, and then we got. So stick with them. So, I guess most people are sort of middling on this call. You're going to be horrified. Stick with it. Then listen to the facts. Don't abreact. And then listen to the subtle in between the spaces things that they say. I wouldn't say, that's not my agenda. That's not my pathway. That's not my trajectory. But it's incredibly useful. I said that on the with Christian. If you want to be criticized, why not ask your enemy for feedback, because it's the truth. And so if you want to test anything that you've got, if it can pass the test, I quite like, there's Jordan Peterson, who is charismatic, bright, but everyone thinks he's alt-right and crazy. If you can spot a flaw in his argument, well done you. Well done you. That's an intellectual challenge I've managed twice in the last year. I feel very smug and proud to do that. With these guys, when you can spot a fault in their argument, really well done you. Well done you, because it's pretty robust. It's not the whole story. What I like about Glenn Lowry is he's literally go, all right, John, well, what I'll do, it's called Two Black Men. It's blogging TV. And what he will do, well, obviously on the progressive side, they'd say this, and they literally counterpose the two sides of the argument and then sometimes reconcile it. Pure education. Yeah. So that's there's three recommendations.
Yeah, and I do think it is, we can get caught up in our own bubble of like-minded people, and it doesn't move our thinking forward. And I think there is something to listening to people with diverse opinions up and until a point. So we have a question here from Tatiana Bruni. This is for Matthew. It says, your glossary entries are quite harsh of tone towards the whites, in parentheses, But when you interviewed Ola Jungeris for your pop-up channel about her glossary, she talked about finding ways to move away from the harshness from the different sides. What did you get out of your conversation with Ola?
Fair enough. Okay, so my harshness, you're right. So I shouldn't have really called it a glossary. It was from my own perspective, but it is a particular journey through. I'm sorry about the harshness. With Ola, we could debate who did the most work. I've got 50 words, she's got 150. Maybe that means she worked harder. They're much more neutral ideas. The main contribution Ola and I found was I was really giving a commentary on America. Am I qualified to do so? No. What she was coming from is a Russian woman brought up in New Zealand, living in Berlin, doing more generalized diversity work. What she was introducing us to is American diversity is not European diversity. You know, when I talked about the Brixton Riots, no one was killed. The cops don't wear guns. You know, the UK scenario. So yeah, tragically, the deaths are not on the streets as they are in America. The deaths are in prison, police stations, where nasty things happen in private. And in Europe, it's a different thing. If you look at, say, Islamophobia, ISIS terrorism, vans driving into crowds in Paris and the rest of it, it's a very different idea. It's a very Charlie Hebdo. It's a very different vibration there. With some bizarre stuff going on with possibly immigrant populations in Stuttgart or somewhere. It is a different idea. So I like what her contribution. She was coming from a very broad technical base and seeing it. And I really liked, it was very refreshing what she was saying about, you know, her own personal experience. She and I are getting less work. Tamara pointed out very kindly some of my characteristics, that I'm 25-year-old and no, you know, so I'm not exactly top of the ticket at the moment, which I get, you know, here we go. And then Ola was finding the same thing as well. You know, you're not diverse enough. So that was happening.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting. I think that, you know, I certainly, when I saw your glossary come out, and I thought, oh, you know, I know Matthew's going to get some criticism for this, but yay, because, you know, I've got criticism for just being in the room. So I think that is part of it, right? That part of this process, part of the journey for all of us in our awareness and consciousness is about putting ourselves into a space to be criticized, to be judged, and I think that is a place and space that white folks aren't necessarily used to being in, for things that are quite typical, right? So that me and my Black experience, you know, when the boards, you know, or SIETAR Europa Board of Directors said, you know, we'd like you to be president, are you willing to step into that space? I knew just by virtue of stepping into that space, I would get criticism, regardless of what kind of president I was or what I would do as president. Before I was even president, I got criticism, right? And that's part of the Black experience. And so then to take the steps to do what you would do, whether it's structural change or, you know, working with the board to make SIETAR Europa an anti-racist organization, you know, part of this process is putting yourself into a position to be judged and take criticism. And for white allies and advocates to move into that space, I think that's really, for me, such a critical part of all of us moving forward. And for SIETAR Europa, that is a overwhelmingly predominantly white organization. If white folks in this organization don't move into this space, the organization will not move or change.
Yes, and there's no comment there. You wouldn't get me saying cynically like the last 20 years. No, very good. And yeah, and so I'm getting criticism. Well, yeah, I get criticism. I've got the wrong tone. We call that tone police. I'm too light about heavy subjects. I'm too politicize my sort of progressive route, but I can't stand cancel culture either, or my cheekiness about people with dyed hair shouting at policemen. Um, who cares? Who cares? So, and I love do not start all this. I quite enjoy engaging with trolls. That sounds mad, and I don't do too much of it. Someone said that's racist. Blah 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 blah. I said, you want to watch Ibrahim Kendi, and then you probably never have to type that into the computer again. She freaked out, and I said, well, do you want to have a chat? No. Okay, then bye. And you just think, because I do believe in the synthesis. When someone is coming in, maybe it's intellectual arrogance. If they've got something, then I need to hear it. If they've got a truth, I don't like it, but if they've got a truth, I've got to hear it. Yeah. I might not like it. I might not agree with it. I might try and deny it all. But if it's a truth, if it's something that's valid, that's going to stand up, it exists. Get on with it.
That's what I say all the time. I'll take the truth, but your opinion isn't always necessarily the truth. All right.
Well, and then we go on to the slightly crazy.
All right. So tell me, based upon your experience, what role should white facilitators, writers, coaches, and leaders, what should be the role of white facilitators, writers, coaches, and leaders around race and inclusion, particularly now?
Now they should shut up and listen. They should not make the assumptions that Black people are lining up to teach them and want to take extra classes. In a facilitated session, it is about share of microphone. It is about owning your unearned advantage, owning your inherited stuff in a modest way, which is going to break the ice so that you can be a more relaxed, less defensive person. So the work is the self, and then giving other people a break and maybe listening to those stories and not defending. So shut up until the end, space, and go something like, and until they do another verse of their story. And don't spare us the white tears and the, oh, that's awful, or don't reverse it. Well, at least, none of that rubbish. So true listening, and then a space at the table, And, have you got a fake diversity stone carved near the entrance hall of your unoccupied building through COVID, which is about we're equal and we're respectful and all this? It's probably not true. It's probably aspirational, but you've done the one and done. You've done a bit of tokenism. You've done an hour. Why not revisit that and do that? That's for the corporate executives. For interculturalists, I'll say this again, there's nothing I've learned in the diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion space that takes anything away from culture. I think it's actually richer. That's probably heresy, and I'll be thrown out of SIETAR immediately. SIETAR, it's so rich. It is so rich and extraordinary. And this thing about slavery and the rest of it, like Mitch McConnell, ghastly person. There's my mediator neutrality coming out again. You had a black president. Get on with it. No one who was a slaver is alive today. It's not our problem. We're not asking for too much. Just acknowledge that these things happen. Stop revising history. Own it all as well. And then to get to that comfortable place, can we co-construct a comfortable place where anything can be spoken of respectfully? That is going to be so much better for everybody. And there's a business case for that. There's an ethical case. There's a legal case for that. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. I think for me, I think those are great. I think the listening is key. And for me, when I think about all the years that I've been involved with SIETAR, and I think about the important work and unimportant work that I have been doing on the SIETAR Europa board for the last 2.5 years, or maybe longer. that what would be a measure of success for this anti-racism series and the other work we're doing is to be in a group of SIETARians and start a conversation about race and whiteness and not have people go into defense. Right?
Yeah, exactly. To not, yeah, exactly. Not to prickle and freak out and avoid and get stressed. But, yeah, I mean, they even do that within culture. They even do that within culture. So if you're sort of doing the, let's move on from Hofstede, there's enough of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that this is all something around listening and dialogue and facilitating that, we all know, and we're just extending, asking people to extend what we already know and do into new areas. And I have to say, and I will say to the people who are left here, thank you all for all the wonderful comments that are coming into the chat. And for those of you who have attended this session and other sessions, that there's been an overwhelmingly positive response and fruitful discussion that is happening as part of this, that is very exciting to be a part of. I was very excited to see the work that you did, Matthew, and have that be a part of, have your work be a part of our session. I have here one last question and then I'll wrap up. Well, there's two questions. Okay, so we have two questions. One is, in both of your views as to the difference between equity and equality, the use of the word equity is gaining traction. For you, Matthew, how do you differentiate between equity and equality?
So equity was where we were going, which is producing equal circumstances. That can be problematic if you're putting difference into the same circumstances. That can be inappropriate. So equity is a more optimal and tailored idea that different people have different needs to maybe get an equality of opportunity, if that makes sense. Teacher Thorpe, how have I done?
Oh, I think it's pretty good. I think equality, equality is asking for the same thing, right? If men have the right to vote, we want women to have the right to vote. If Blacks have the right to vote, then we want, if whites have the right to vote, then Black folks need the right to vote. And there are still areas in which there is a need to fight for equality. But equity is about addressing the different needs, right?
Sure.
So if we think about it around gender, there are women have different needs in the workplace as mothers than men might need, or as women, right? May have different needs from the workplace than men do. Trans folks may have different needs from the workplace. The LGBT community may have different needs from the workplace than cisgendered folks. And so organizations can't sort of equally apply policy when there are different needs. It's I think the quote is Jack Condon that people all over the world have needs, but how we satisfy those needs is what we mean by culture, right? And so how we
nice.
Yeah, so that sort of finding different solutions for different problems. When I do my session on belonging, do you remember when you were a kid? I know I'm asking you to go back, but there was these shape balls and the ball had different shapes and you had to put the blocks into the hole, right? So, we use that expression, you can't fit a square peg into a round hole. And I think about equity as having one of those balls where, in order for all the different shapes to get in, they have to have a shape that fits them. And then when they have a shape that fits them, then everybody gets to be in the center of the ball. And so for me, that's what I mean by inclusion. So we have one last question from Joe. So we know that we can't finish without Joe's questions because it all begins and ends with Joe Kearns. He said, are you both optimistic that things will be better in 20 years?
Yeah, shall I get that? Depends what happens at the White House, really. Yeah, God, and I tell you, I'm genuinely horrified by some of the crazy that's going on now, but I don't think it's necessarily sustainable. So it's either going to go right down to the bottom. I don't think it will, but it could get a lot worse before it gets better. But no way. If you look where we've come, and I know we're not allowed to say that, we've made a lot of progress. That's a sort of comfort, exceptionalism, denial, blah, blah, blah. There have been systemic improvements.
Yeah.
But the job here is to get all thinking and feeling folk to raise up from chapter 1 or level 1 to level 2. And if we can do that, things like, BBC or Netflix representation, things like Kendi's massive success this summer, or just YouTube, just the democracy. I know there's a lot of problems with stuff, but the democracy of Zoom and YouTube, there's a lot of force for good. There's a lot of force for good. So I'm totally an optimist, but that's my pathology, really.
Yeah, and I'm an American, which makes me genetically predisposed to optimism. For me, it's two parts. Am I optimistic about the world we live in and what it will look like in 20 years? Absolutely. As somebody who has done a lot of work around generational differences, I truly believe that the two generations after me will leaps and bounds of changes. When we look at, young millennials in Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that gives you a glimpse into what the future of politics in the US may look like, and I'm hopeful for that. SIETAR Europa, will SIETAR Europa, will SIETAR USA, will SIETAR as a global entity look different in 20 years? That's up to us, right? That's up to us. And I think that all of us, in terms of changing and reframing our organization, have a role and responsibility in challenging ourselves to be a better and different organization in 20 years. But I think that we do run the risk of looking exactly the same in 20 years as we do today if we don't do this work. And that's where I perhaps, Joe, am less optimistic, but really hopeful that all of us do this work and we don't wait for the next generation to come in and make change, but that all of us do the work now.
Lovely.
All right, Matthew, as usual, this has been a great conversation. Without lubrication.
Thanks, mate. Anna, it's fantastic. And thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody else, for being here. Our next anti-racism series event is going to be on Wednesday, November 25th, with Natasha Aralaya from British Columbia, with part 2 on white fragility and looking at the role of white fragility for intercultural practitioners. And I'm looking forward to that conversation and seeing you all there. Everybody have a wonderful week. Everybody have the best week that you can. That's what I'm going with. And thank you again, Matthew, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Great job. Thanks.